Hello, Miss Miller's class. This is part 10 of the Sisters Grimm. Sabrina's heart began to rise. Granny felt exactly the way she did. Why hadn't she told them her true feelings about the town? It would have kept Sabrina from feeling so guilty and confused about the place. "You're looking at the wrong people," she said, feeling encouraged by the old woman's revelation. "You should be looking at the ever-afters." "Ever-afters are people," Granny said, setting down her knife. "They have families and homes and dreams, and murderous plots, kidnapping schemes, and plans to destroy the town. You don't really believe they're all bad, do you? What about Snow White and the sheriff?" "They're ever-afters. We just haven't discovered what they're really up to." "Sabrina," Granny shouted, "no grandchild of mine is going to be a bigot. Hatred can grow, child, into something terrible and beyond your control." "You're defending the ever-afters? They took my parents away and you're defending them?" Sabrina cried. She jumped off the stool. "Yes, I'm going to defend them and anyone else who people choose to discriminate against." "How can you do that?" Sabrina screamed, on the verge of tears. "Because that is what I choose to do," the old lady said. "Yes, there are bad people among the ever-afters, but there are bad people among us all. You can't blame them all for the actions of one. I know it's difficult when you don't know who is responsible, but the guilt cannot be everyone's." Sabrina felt as if she were suffocating. The kitchen suddenly seemed so small, as though there wasn't enough room for the both of them anymore. "You can look at it any way you want," she said, taking a step backwards. "But if they aren't all in on it, then they sure aren't stepping up to help. And every time you smile at one of them or shake one of their hands, you are just making it that much easier for them to stab you in the back." "Sabrina," Granny said, "you have to get hold of your anger. If you cannot learn to control your hatred will control you." "I'll get a hold of my anger when Mom and Dad are safe at home," the girl cried. Sabrina spun around and rushed out of the room, up the stairs and into her bedroom. She slammed the door and ran to her bed. Burying her head under the pillows, she broke into violent sobs. In 2 weeks it would be Christmas, the second Christmas since one of the ever-afters, had kidnapped her parents. Why didn't anyone care about bringing them home? Why was she the only one who saw what was really going on in Fairy Point Landing? Sabrina awoke to a knocking on her bedroom door. She looked over at the clock on the nightstand and realized it was already 7 o'clock at night. She had been asleep for more than 3 hours. Still in her robe and socks, she crawled out of bed and crossed the room to open the door. Mr. Canis was waiting on the other side. "The family awaits you in the car," he said. "I don't feel like going anywhere," she responded. The thought of seeing Granny and Dolphine right now made her sick to her stomach. "Child, this is not an invitation," Mr. Canis said. "There is work to be done. Now get dressed now and meet us in the car." "Where are we going?" Mr. Canis took a deep breath before he answered. "The answer to that question will not change the fact that you are going there. We are waiting in the car." "I'll be down in a minute," Sabrina said. She closed the door and got dressed, but the fresh clothes didn't do anything to hide the horrible odor coming off of her. She had slept through bath time, and now she smelled like a slimy, bottom-feeding fish. She hurried through the empty house, put on her coat and hat, and opened the front door. Granny was waiting outside with her key ring in hand. "Feeling better?" she asked. Sabrina nodded, thankful the old woman wasn't going to keep harping on their conversation. "Good. A nap can do wonders for a person. Hurry along, everyone's in the car." Dolphine, Elvis, and Puck were in the back seat, looking warm and well-fed. The little girl and the dog both stared out the window when Sabrina got inside. Apparently, her little sister was back to giving Sabrina the silent treatment, and this time Elvis was joining her. Puck, on the other hand, looked at her and laughed. "You are in so much trouble." He chuckled, sounding impressed. "Where are we going?" she asked. "The sheriff needs our help," Granny explained. They cruised through the country roads, heading towards the elementary school. Mr. Canis pulled into the parking lot. Sheriff Hampstead's car was parked nearby. When everyone piled out, the old man once again climbed onto the top of the car and sat in his meditative posture. Elvis whined when he realized he was being left behind. "Buddy, you can come in with us, but there's a criminal stealing blankets out of the back seats of cars," Delphine warned. "He might snatch yours while we're inside." The big dog bit down hard on the edge of his blanket, eyed the window suspiciously as the family went into the school. They rushed to the principal's office, where they found the sheriff sitting in a car taking notes while Mr. Hamlin paced back and forth. "Relda, what are you doing here?" the principal asked. "The sheriff asked us to come by," she explained. "The Grimms are pretty good at finding people," Hampstead said awkwardly. It was obvious to Sabrina he was trying to be discreet about the family being deputized. "We're happy to help," Granny said. "No offense, Relda, but my kid is freezing out in the cold somewhere. I don't need an old woman and her 2 kids. I need the police department," Hamlin said. "I've got the best tracking dog in the world in the car," Granny said. "I'll take Elvis over 100 police officers any day. We'll find your boy." The principal sat down in his chairs and rolled it over to the icy window. "It's so cold out there," he whispered. "My girls were chasing Wendell this afternoon," Granny said. "I heard all about it," the man responded without turning from the window. "Then you know he's involved with the deaths." Hamlin spun around in his seat angrily and pointed his finger at the old woman. "He didn't do it," he shouted. "I know that, Piper. In fact, I think he's been trying to stop what's going on at the school. He's so curious. One afternoon, we watched an old black and white detective movie on TV together, and he was hooked. Now everything's a mystery. I should have known he'd get himself in trouble. He also seems to have picked up his father's flair for music. I hear he's using a harmonica to control animals." "Relda, he's a good kid," Hamlin said. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door, and Mr. Sheepshank entered. "Oh, hello, everybody. So sorry to interrupt," he said, pointing to the wristwatch on his freckled arm. "Mr. Hamlin, it's time." "Counselor, my son is missing," the principal shouted angrily. Sabrina turned to look at the rosy-cheeked man, who smiled nervously. "Of course. We can talk later," he said. He closed the door and was gone. Delphine took her silver star out of her pocket and pinned it on her chest, so that everyone would see her badge. "Mr. Hamlin, we don't want you to worry. We'll find your son and bring him back to you." Granny smiled at the little girl. "Why are you so eager to help me?" "It's our job," Delphine said. "To protect and serve." The little girl reached down, yanked on her belt, and pulled her pants up. Sabrina almost burst out laughing, but quickly stopped herself when Sheriff Hampstead's angry face told her he recognized the little girl's impression. "I know you had a history with my family, Piper, but I'd like to think we're never too far along to start over," Granny said, extending her hand. Hamlin stared at it for a moment, then shook it firmly. "All we need is his locker number." The principal punched a key on his desktop computer and the screen lit up. He typed in a few strokes and smiled. "His number is 323. That's right around the corner near the boiler room door," he said. "What should I do? Can I go with you?" "Wait here," the sheriff said as he stood up from his chair. "We'll call you as soon as we know anything." Hamlin and the family walked out of the office and down the hall until they found 323, right where the principal had told them it would be. "Do you have some kind of magic to open locks?" Sabrina asked, as she eyed the combination lock on the door. Granny opened her handbag and pulled out a hammer. "I wouldn't call it magic, exactly," she said, handing the hammer to Puck. The boy grinned and raised the hammer high over his head. He brought it down hard on the lock, and it snapped in two. "Can I do another?" he asked, but the old woman snatched the hammer out of his hand and placed it back into her handbag. Then she tossed the broken pieces of the lock on the floor and opened the locker. Inside was a winter coat Wendell had left behind. Granny pulled it out and tucked it under her arm. "I really do appreciate this," the sheriff said. "Don't think twice about it," the old woman said. Back in the parking lot, the Grimms and Puck found Mr. Canis still meditating on the roof of the jalopy. "We're heading into the forest," Granny said, opening the back door and letting Elvis out. "Why don't you stay here in case Wendell wanders back to the school?" "Are you sure you won't be needing me?" the old man said. "We've got this one handled," Granny said. "Can I ask you a question, Mr. Canis?" Delphine asked. "Of course, little one. What do you think about when you're sitting on top of the car?" Mr. Canis thought for a moment, then looked up at the moon, now high over the nearby forest. I concentrate on all the people I hurt when I was unable to control myself." "And that helps you stay calm?" Sabrina asked. "No, child, it reminds me of my guilt," he replies. Sabrina didn't know a lot of fairy tale stories. Her dad used to say fairy tales were pointless. When other kids were reading about the Little Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast, her father was discussing the news with his daughters, or reading them the Sunday comics, using different voices for every character. Sabrina and Delphine had done their fairy tale reading on the sly or at school. Still, everyone knew the story of Little Red Riding Hood, and as Sabrina looked at Mr. Canis, a terrible realization ran through her. The man sitting on the car roof, who slept across the hall from them at night, had killed an old woman once upon a time. Only it wasn't a story. It really happened. He tried to eat a child, too. How could Granny let him live in the house? No wonder her dad had forbidden even a copy of Mother Goose from entering their home. He was trying to protect them from the truth. Granny was busy holding Wendell's coat under Elvis's nose. The giant dog took a deep lungful and was soon trotting across the school lawn, sniffing madly at the grass. "Looks like he's got the scent," Granny said. "Let's go find our Wendell." Elvis's big feet crunched on the hard ground. The night had grown bitterly cold, and every once in a while Sabrina spotted a snowflake floating towards the ground. She was freezing, even in her heavy coat. If Wendell was still alive out in the woods without his, it would be a miracle. Elvis sniffed the air. Once the big dog caught a scent, he never lost it. When he reached the edge of the trees, he stopped and barked impatiently at the family. It was obvious they were slowing him down. "Oh, I wish I could bottle his energy," Granny said, taking Sabrina's arm in order to help herself across the school's icy lawn. "I'd be a rich old lady." When they finally reached Elvis, he led them into the woods. He sniffed wildly, rushing back and forth along a path. Following the scent, but managing to stick close to the family, as if he knew the old woman would have a difficult time keeping up with his pace. Sabrina heard a branch snap in the distance and saw the dog's keen ears perk up. She expected him to run off howling in the direction of the sound, but instead he continued to follow his invisible path. It seemed as if they had been searching for hours, and Sabrina's toes were getting numb. Puck complained and suggested they give up several times, insisting that Wendell's rabbit army had probably turned on him and were now feasting on his chubby body. Sabrina was also ready to give up when they came to a small clearing and a sight so incredible even Granny gasped. There on the ground at their feet was a mound of fur nearly 4 feet high and 6 feet wide. At first, Sabrina thought it might be a small bear. But as they got closer, they realized it wasn't a single animal, but a group of many. In fact, it was a pile of rabbits huddled together in the cold. Elvis growled at the pile, but if the little forest animals noticed, they chose to ignore him. "I told you," Puck cried. "His Wonderland army mutated. I hope he was delicious, little rodents." The old woman stepped close to the pile and leaned down. "Wendell!" The mound stirred for a moment, then became totally still. "Wendell, your father is worried sick about you," Granny scolded. "Now come out of there this instant." "No," a voice shouted from the depths of the rabbits. "You're going to take me to jail. I won't go." "No one is taking you to jail, Wendell," Granny said. All we want to do is take you home." The mound stirred and shivered. A brief note from the boy's harmonica was heard, and suddenly the rabbits rushed off in different directions. "Run, you dirty little carrot munchers," Puck shouted after them. "But know today that your kind has made an enemy of the trickster king." When they were all gone, Wendell lay at the family's feet. Granny stepped forward, helped the boy up, and got him into his coat. "I didn't do it," he insisted. "Then why did you run?" Sabrina asked. "And send rabbits to eat us. I'm a 7-year-old girl," Dolphine said. "Do you know how important bunny rabbits are to me?" "I didn't think you'd believe me. I knew how it looked, but I was trying to stop them," the boy pleaded. "If I had gotten in trouble, it would have ruined all my work so far." He shoved his hands into his coat pocket and pulled out a business card. He gave it to Granny. The old woman read it, looked impressed, and nodded to him. Sabrina took the card and read it closely. It said, "Wendell Emery Hamlet, private investigator." At the bottom of the card was a magnifying glass with a huge eye inside. "So you're a detective," Granny said with a smile. Dolphine snatched the card and studied it. "I want a business card, too." "Something terrible is happening inside the school," Wendell said. "I'm trying to find whoever's responsible and stop them." "We know. Why don't you tell us everything on the way back to school? Your father is there waiting for you." The group trudged back through the forest, and Wendell told them all he'd heard. "I was leaving school yesterday when I looked back and saw something happening in Mr. Grumpner's room," he said, stopping to blow his nose into his handkerchief. "Sorry, I got really bad allergies." "It's okay," Granny replied. "Like I was saying, Grumpner fell backwards over some ducks, and at first I thought he might be sick. Over some desks, and at first I thought he might be sick. But then a monster attacked him. I was kind of far away, so I couldn't really see, but it looked like a giant spider. It grabbed Grumpner and started covering him in its sticky web. Well, I remembered from science class that birds are a spider's natural predator." "What's a predator?" Dolphine asked. "It's like a hunter," Sabrina said. "So I got out my harmonica I'd bought and blew into it as hard as I could. I didn't even know if it would work. Dad told me to never do it. He said musical instruments are off limits on account of his past. Please don't tell him I bought a harmonica. He'll get really mad." Granny took his hand. "Don't worry, Wendell." He relaxed and continued. "So I just thought of birds, and before I knew it, the sky was full of them. They were looking at me like I was their leader or something. It took me a while to realize they were looking for instructions. So I pointed at the window and said, "Save Mr. Grumpner." "How come you remember Mr. Grumpner?" Sabrina asked. "The rest of our class doesn't." "My dad had a protection spell put on our house. Whenever they dust the town, we aren't effective. So anyways, the birds went straight for the window and smashed it. They flew in and attacked the monster. Unfortunately, it was too late. Even from out in the yard, I could see the spider had already eaten him." "That explains the feathers," Dolphine said. "What about the janitor?" Sabrina said, still not sure she believed the strange boy's story. "Mr. Spangler gave me detention for refusing to play dodgeball. I mean, you know how to play the game. Let's move on already. So when I walked in, there was this ugly, hairy thing fighting with Mrs. Hart and Mrs. White. At first I thought it was a bear, but it moved away too fast and it had these weird yellow eyes. Mrs. Hart was pretty useless against it. She hid behind a desk and screamed while Miss White fought the thing off. I got my harmonica out, wondering if I could control it. And at first it seemed to work. But then it ran to the window, opened it, and leapt outside. When you guys saw me, I wasn't running away. I was trying to catch it." "You're quite brave, Wendell," Miss Granny said. "My line of work isn't for the faint of heart," he declared, wiping his nose on his handkerchief. "We also had a run-in with an unusual creature," the old woman said. "I know this is going to sound crazy, but I don't think these creatures are monsters. I think they're the children of ever-afters." "That's an excellent deduction," said Granny. "You've got the makings of a great detective." The boy smiled. "The only thing I wasn't sure about was why the attacks were taking place in the first place. That is, until I found the tunnels." "Tunnels?" Sabrina and Dolphine cried. "Yes, someone is digging under the school. They start at the boiler room and go on for a long time. I'm sure it's all connected. The tunnels, the giant spider, hairy things. I just don't know how." "Perhaps we should team up," Granny said. "Combining our efforts might solve the case sooner." "Sorry, lady, I work alone," Wendell said as they reached the front door of the school. "Detective work is dangerous business. I don't want any dames getting in the way." Sabrina rolled her eyes. "Someone's been watching too many detective movies, all right," she thought. "I understand," Granny said, trying her best to sound disappointed. Justice Hamlin came running down the hallway. He swooped his boy up in his arms and hugged him. "Do you know how worried your mother and I have been?" the father said, half lecturing, half laughing. "I'm sorry, Dad, but there's a caper afoot, and I'm in the thick of it." "Thank you, Relda," Mr. Hamlin said, reaching over and kissing the old woman's cheek. "Thank you all." Dolphine tugged on her pants and stepped forward, mimicking the sheriff's funny little bow-legged walk. "I'm just doing my job, citizen," she said. "You're welcome," Sabrina said. "I've heard stories that you have a harmonica, young man," reaching his hand out to his boy. Wendell frowned. "But I need it," he argued. "It helps with my detective work." "You're about to retire," his father said sternly. "Until these monsters are caught, your days as a detective are over." Wendell reached into his pocket and pulled out his shiny harmonica. He reluctantly handed it to his father and grimaced when Hamlin stuffed it in his pants pocket. "Mr. Hamlin, before we go, I was wondering something," Sabrina said. "Are there any more children here at the school like Wendell?" "What do you mean?" the principal asked. "You know, kids of ever-afters." "He's the only one I know of." "Anyone else on the staff?" "Only Miss White, myself, and now Miss Hart. About 10 years ago, Miss Muffet, the Beast, and the Frog Prince were all on staff, but they went in on lottery tickets and won millions of dollars and quit. I was happy for them, but it was a real shame. Good teachers are hard to find." Anyone else? I'm not sure, Hamlin said. They don't really come with tags. I suppose there might be a couple, but I wouldn't know. Of course, Granny said. She looked at Sabrina, and the girl saw a spark in her eye, the kind her grandmother got when she found an important clue. Is there a phone I could use? The principal gestured toward his door. There's one in the secretary's office. Thank you, Granny said, slipping out the door. Children, I'll be right back. The group stared at one another in awkward silence. At last Puck spoke. So, Piper, how many rats are there? He asked, referring to the man's famous adventure. Thousands, the principal replied. That's gross, Delphine groaned. Granny returned to the room and smiled. Well, we have to be going now, she said, turning to Wendell. Try to stay out of trouble. Trouble would be wise to stay out of my way, the boy said, sounding like a movie detective. As the family walked back down the hall, they passed the boiler room. We should check the tunnels now while no one is here, Sabrina suggested, walking over to the boiler room door and turning the knob. It was locked. No, if people are being killed to protect what's in them, I suggest we take the hint for now, Granny replied, at least until we find out who these murderers are. In the meantime, I think I know the parents of our killers. Let's have a chat with them. A skinny Christmas tree sat at the entrance to the police station. It was hung with a few strands of tinsel and had a garland wrapped sloppily around it. A couple boxes of shiny bulbs sat underneath it, waiting to be strung on the tree limbs. As they passed the display, Sabrina finally realized how overworked the sheriff was. He didn't even have time to finish his holiday decorations. Sheriff Hampstead was at the front desk, surrounded by 6 of the most unusual people Sabrina had ever seen. She recognized 2 of them immediately. Beauty and the Beast weren't a couple she would soon forget. The dazzling, gorgeous Beauty was a complete contrast to her husband, a fur-covered, fanged-faced beast. As for the others in the room, there was a pretty blonde woman in a tiara, satiny blue gown, standing next to a tall, strong man with enormous green eyes and odd, scaly skin disorder. The Frog Prince, Sabrina realized. Next to them was a chubby woman covered in jewels, Little Miss Muffet, holding hands, or in this case, holding the leg of an enormous black spider nearly the size of Elvis. All 6 of them were complaining and shouting at the sheriff. What's the meaning of this, Hampstead? The Beast growled. We had dinner reservations at Old King Cole's, Beauty cried. Do you know how long it takes to get a table at Christmas time? We called in September. The Frog Prince's bride was as angry as anyone. Drag me out of my home in the middle of the night, she huffed. We're royalty. It's beyond rude, the scaly Frog Prince complained. The spider clicked angrily with its gigantic pincers. Settle down, everyone, the sheriff shouted as he stood up. Relda Grimm will explain everything. What? Since when does Relda Grimm run the police force? Little Miss Muffet demanded. Her spider companion clicked and hissed in protest. The mayor has asked my family to help with the investigation of the 2 murders at Fairy Point Landing Elementary, Granny replied. Little Miss Muffet stepped forward. What's this got to do with us? Miss Muffet, it has everything to do with you, the old woman replied, and your children. The crowd gasped and averted their eyes. Relda Grimm, you've lost your mind, the Beast declared. "None of us have children." "That's what I thought," Granny said, until my granddaughter asked a question that I should have asked myself. Who else worked at Fairy Point Landing Elementary? I had nearly forgotten that you, the Frog Prince, and Little Miss Muffet were all teachers there before the three of you won the lottery. Okay, we will start there on Wednesday.